Everybody, it is Jonathan from Radio Tokyo, and believe it or not, I'm actually live. I know that seems so weird to hear me say that, because typically when I'm live, I'm actually recording, or we're recording if we're doing, a group show. But no, what I mean is I'm actually redoing this show using YouTube's new live streaming setup. It's in beta now. If you're set up to do it, it's kind of cool. We're going to try and do video games and whatnot, you know, here this way. But anyway, okay. I'm actually a little nervous doing it. I'm sorry, but that actually, in a lot of ways, kind of goes along with what I wanted to talk about today on our show. The other day, as everyone should know, Wes Craven actually died. Now, Wes Craven is known for his horror movies. Uh, he's of course very popular. It his work is very popular rather. But it's why it's popular that I wanted to talk about. Uh, One of my good friends mentioned the other day that she was concerned about why it is people are, it, obviously people are sad because Wes Craven was a really good director. He did some really fantastic movies. But what her concern is the people who say that, oh, well, Freddy Krueger is my hero. Now, it does seem a little strange to say Freddy Krueger's, your hero, but that's because Freddy Krueger is kind of a mass murderer, and he's also a child molester, or he was a child molester when he was alive. But most of his career, as a fear, uh, a horror movie character rather, was not ideally the later movies, where he was supposed to be funny. It was supposed to be him terrorizing little kids. Now, the reason for this is if you go by, the 2010 movie, he was falsely accused of wanting to harm children and being murdered and everything and being burned alive kind of pissed him off. Now, that's sort of in line with the original story, but what you find out through the original movies in the 80s is that Freddy Krueger was born to a woman who was raped. She was a nun. She was gang raped by mental patients. Like entirely unstable mental patients, I should say. People who are in need of actually being kept away from society because they cannot and will not ever be a part of it. Violent people. Uh, so her son was known as the bastard of 1,000 maniacs, or 100 maniacs. I'm sorry, 100 maniacs. Uh, when he was born, he was raised, obviously to his mom, who had quit being a nun and everything, and working with this uh, asylum she was at, where she was locked in. And she married an abusive man who was an alcoholic who used to beat Freddy as a child growing up. And he grows up and he learns to torment animals. He learns to torment people. He becomes rude and mean and just an all-around asshole. And no one really liked him. And, surprise, when he becomes an adult, what does he do? Oh, well, he just, decides to kill kids. So he kills, I think, like 12 kids on a street. Wasn't never really found out except for the longest time. When it was his wife who found out, and she turns him in, and the parents come after him and kill him. And then for the rest of forever, he was left, one, pissed off, two, tormented, three, dead, clearly, and he came back and enacted vengeance on the children of one of his surviving victims. Uh, that's pretty interesting storylines, and I think it's something that everyone seems to know. It's the idea that there's this evil there in the world, and it's coming back to haunt you. And they took the original storyline for the 2010 movie and made it to what we had in there, where he was the groundskeeper at this day school, and all the kids said he molested them. But all the kids, through time were told it never happened, and then all of a sudden, oh, look, we start having all these nightmares and everything. And what that was him coming back to get vengeance. It's not exactly the original story, but it's still the fearful thing. Now, a lot of people look at Freddy Krueger as being kind of a hero because, well, he fights Jason Voorhees. He's this big bad guy and everything. But in reality, he's not really a hero. Uh, if anything, he's an anti-hero. If you really want to call him something, you can call him an anti-hero. But he's not a good guy. There's no way around him being a good guy. It doesn't matter what interpretation you look at him. He's done something wrong, and what it is he's murdering people continually in their sleep. Now, if you bring him in the real world, of course, he's almost invulnerable. Well, I'm not invulnerable. He's vulnerable in the real world, but in the dream world, he's unstoppable. Now, like my friend mentioned, it's kind of concerning to know that there are people who look at him and kind of want to glorify him and say, well, he's amazing. Well, the truth is, Freddy Krueger is without a doubt a villain, and as a villain, villains are always more popular than heroes. It's kind of a fact of life. But Freddy Krueger, as I said, is a villain. He's a bad guy. He's a child molester. Now, if you look at what Wes Craven had to say when he came up with this character, it's based off of several things. The dying in your sleep was a article that he read in a newspaper. I believe it was in Thailand where it was happening. But several teenagers kept reporting that they had nightmares over and over, like the same nightmare over and over and over. It was always violent. It was always terrifying. They always woke up screaming. They were sweating and everything because they were afraid. And then eventually they would just die in their sleep. And it was a common pattern, and there's never been an explanation why. There's never been anything discovered as to why, all of these kids would just have these recurring nightmares and then would die. So Mr. Craven took that idea and said, I want to have a killer do that. But where he got the image for Freddy Krueger from was from when he was younger himself. When Wes Craven was younger, he was essentially followed home by someone who looked as if his face was burned and was just leering at him and staring at him through glass and everything. And that wound up being combined with the teenagers dying to create Freddy Krueger. The whole hand with the gloves and with the glove and the knives on and everything, that was added later. But the essence was that Wes Craven saw something that scared people. It made them nervous. They didn't know what was going on. They couldn't explain it. And he took that and he said, that's fear. I want to make a movie about something that scares people. Mass murderers scare people. Now, typically, like myself, we've had a rash of shootings in the United States. I think it's 245 mass shootings in the United States this year. And by mass shootings, I mean 2 or more people have been shot. Okay, so don't think just a single person being shot is a mass shooting. No, I'm saying there's 200 some odd instances in the United States in 2015 alone where 2 or more people have been killed. Uh, we see all that on the news, and you see stuff like the fear mongering from, the very politicized fear mongering, uh, about Black Lives Matter and police being shot, and there's going to be a race war, there's going to be stuff, there's going to be stuff that's going to happen. And what it is people playing into these fears that people have, the unknown, what could possibly happen because someone is angry, someone is upset. And so you have people who are, now I'm not going to point fingers and name names, Fox News, but what you see is people being forced into believing that they're not safe. And that's something that's happened for a long time, particularly here. We do have a culture of fear in the United States. Now, that's not always the bad thing, uh, but sometimes it can be bad. It can be really bad. But what Wes Craven did was he took one of the fears that people have, the fear of, a child molester. And now I've known people who have been abused as children. I'm not going to, state names here or anything, but I do know those people who have been abused as children. And I've met someone who's abused children. Uh, didn't know it, when I met them, but later on I found out what they were. And I don't like that person. I'm I'm afraid of that person, not just because, I'm an adult, or because I was a kid, because I was actually an adult at the time, but but looking back, I'm afraid of them because I know that they have hurt somebody, and I've also met someone who's shot people and everything, and that's fine. But I'm not, oddly enough, I'm not afraid of that person because what you have in this child molester is someone who's actually doing not just physical harm sometimes, but mental harm and emotional harm. They're putting you're putting this kid or these children in a life changing situation that may not be that good. And of course, I mean, it's not that good, of course. But what I mean is, it's a thing. It's a fear, and people don't like people who abuse children or abuse animals. You know, and that's why uh, Freddy Krueger, to me, is so effective. He plays on that fear. The idea that, hey, if you're a parent, look, you have kids, you're going to be worried about your kids growing up and being kidnapped or, being killed randomly, in a car wreck or gun violence or hell, sometimes now even falling asleep, like it's the idea, like they showed, characters taking baths and everything, waking up and because their cat or whatever woke him up, and they wake up and they're murdered, whatever. It's that inherent fear, and that does in a lot of ways drive society. But it's something that you see in a lot of mediums. One of my favorite Batman villains, for example, is actually the Scarecrow. Not because I like the character design. Well, I do like the design of Jonathan Crane, but I like him because everything he does is based off of the innate fear in human beings. He's someone who was picked on, he was bullied, and he grew up, having an abusive stepmother and whatnot, and he grew up, basically being a psychopath. But he went on and became a normal person in society until he was pushed a little too far, and he just snaps. And the rest of his career is spent as a villain, tormenting the ever-loving shit out of people. Now, I like the Scarecrow for that because he's someone who is capable just, through, well, of course he has to have his fear toxin and everything else. But essentially, he's capable of bringing Gotham to its knees without really even trying. I mean, he doesn't have to actually do anything, but just make a suggestion. Now, oftentimes, the suggestion, as I said, is backed up with having the fear toxin, which is the catalyst for it. But it's essentially his suggestion that makes Gotham paranoid. It makes them afraid, and that's why he's so powerful. He's so powerful that Batman has had to augment his armor to get away from it. just to be able to avoid the fear talks and everything else. And typically, if Batman has to do something, to avoid you in some way, you're doing the right thing. But I've seen, firsthand the power of the Scarecrow. Now, I mean, just like the mask. Now I've never, put on a straw hat and taken a scythe and run up and down the street screaming. No. Last Halloween and this coming Halloween too, I dressed up as a scarecrow. Now, when I say this Halloween, I mean I'm actually working on a second mask. I'm not going to use the one from last year, even though it's perfect for this. I'm going to make a brand new one and everything. But I dressed up as a scarecrow last year. Now, it was me, like, all of me was there. You could see I had a head, my neck, uh, body and everything. Nothing was hidden except for my face. And what I had, which is a burlap map with these big, ugly ass stitches in it. You could see one eye completely, my mouth, like there was an open hole for my mouth with these big, ugly stitches going through it, and I had a hat on. And it scared people. It scared little kids. It scared adults even, because they couldn't see me, and I was essentially able to scare people just by being myself, and that's what the Scarecrow is able to do. Just by essentially putting on a mask and saying "Be afraid of me." That's kind of what happens, and that's a lot like what Freddy Krueger represents. Now, he's not wearing a mask, obviously, but he's able to make people afraid just because he has some kind of motivation. Now, mine was, dress up as a Batman villain and hand out candy. That was my motivation, but I wanted the mask to be, I wanted it to be fearsome. I wanted people to look at me and, kind of just take a step back and say, "Holy shit." I wanted that reaction. And I was able to play on the fears of people that way. Now, it kind of makes me feel like it makes me seem like an asshole for doing it, but that's what I wanted. And that's, like I said, that's the way society is. We tend to look at things that we should be afraid of and essentially hero worship is what we get. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the bomber in the Boston Marathon. There was a rash of people who looked at him and said, "Oh, he's handsome. He could never have done that." And when I say people, I mean it was a lot of young women looking at him and saying, "He's so attractive. He could never do that. I want to marry him." And then you have individuals like Charles Manson, who didn't ever actually kill anybody, but yet he's serving life in prison for murders of people because he was able to convince people to murder someone. And there's been multiple individuals who have written to him and said, "Oh, I like you. I want to get married to you." And he's finally married one of those people. Uh, Society has a tendency to look at these individuals that we should genuinely be afraid of, that we should genuinely, run from and shun, and we just make heroes out of them because that's just the way we are. And it's because that's our fear fucking with us, basically. We're as okay. The way I look at it is we're essentially able to look at these things that should make us afraid, and we can, and because we can see, oh, hey, this is kind of set away from us. Uh, like the reason I mentioned the shootings going on, that have been in the news a lot. It doesn't really impact anyone, even if it's close at home. Now, some of the police officers that have been shot have actually been shot around here, like in the general area around me, like an hour or two's drive away from me. But that's an hour or so away. It doesn't affect me. Now, there was one, maybe 45 minutes away from here or less than that. It doesn't affect me because it's not there. It would have to be in person, essentially, for most people to be affected by it. Now, what happens when that happens is, like it's just a weird thing in society. We don't tend to look at events that are taking place and say, well, that really is going to have an impact on me because we're able to remove ourselves from it. And that, I think, is essentially why people like characters like Freddy Krueger. I think it's why they like Jason Voorhees. I think it's why we idolize people who are mass murderers, because we're removed from it. Now, that's just my personal stance. I could be wrong. You could have an entirely different point of view on this. And if you do, that's actually awesome. And I would really like to hear, what all of you think. Now, if you want to leave in the comments here on YouTube, that's cool. If you want to message me over the Radio Tokyo Facebook page and do that, that's fine. Leave a comment there, whatever. Just what do you think? Like, is there a reason that you think people, idolize things that should make them afraid and react to them without being afraid? Or does it not really bother you at all? Like, whatever your thoughts are, let me know. Anyway, Friday show is coming up really quick. We're going to try and do it live, hopefully. So look out for that. If you miss it live, the course going to be recorded and saved and everything, and it'll be added later on, with the description and the thumbnail art and everything, So just keep an eye out for that. Anyway, yeah, like this video, share this video, comment on it, like us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and we'll talk to all of you soon. And just like the video title says, don't fear the Reaper. It's okay to be afraid. Bye, everybody.